Sergey, our conversation is timed to coincide with Diplomatic Workers' Day. First of all, I congratulate you on this professional holiday. But if we talk about the global picture of the world, in your view, what are the main problems currently facing Russian diplomacy, and what are the key challenges?
The main problem of the world is generally well known. I mean the trends and phenomena that we are observing. It is difficult to say where the development of these trends and phenomena will lead. But the president has repeatedly spoken about the ongoing global processes. These processes are objectively conditioned by the entire course of history and the current course of development, when, after 500 years of Western dominance, which lived off others through methods of slavery and colonialism, a multipolar world is now replacing that system. It has not been invented by anyone. It relies on objective trends, objective processes of the emergence of new centers of economic growth, new centers of financial power, new centers where social problems are successfully solved and new technologies are created. And with all this, of course, comes political influence as well. Countries such as China, India, Brazil, countries united in integration structures. For example, the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, many sub-regional associations on the Eurasian continent such as ASEAN, and of course our post-Soviet configurations, the CSTO, Eurasian Economic Union, and the Union State of Russia and Belarus. All of this acts as increasingly influential players on the international arena, not only economically, commercially, and financially, but also politically, as I have already said. And the West is desperately resisting this. Europe is still trying to dictate its approaches on the Eurasian continent. They are trying to interfere and openly harm the natural processes of interaction between Russia and Central Asian countries, between us and our friends in the South Caucasus. Europe is persistently pushing its way into the Black Sea region, ignoring the existing Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization. The same applies to the Arctic. Until recently, the European Union considered itself quite capable, and most importantly entitled, to interfere in all these processes and claim a leading role. Now their ardor has cooled a bit. They have calmed down, primarily in the context of the policy pursued by the Trump administration, which does not put ensuring Europe's security interests first. On the contrary, it has been declared that the United States has other concerns, primarily in the Western Hemisphere, but not only there. By the way, those who say that this is a new concept of the national security strategy are essentially acknowledging the United States' need to divide the world, saying, here is our zone of influence, and there we understand that China has its interests, Russia, not quite so. Recently, Vice President Vance spoke clearly, stating that the goal is America first. And throughout the world, on the entire globe, America has interests. It is they that will be paramount for Washington's practical actions. Look, the Western Hemisphere is not even discussed, as if everyone should forget about it. But the Middle East, no, because Israel is there, the closest ally of the United States, which must be supported in every way in its confrontation with Iran, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon. So this is by no means a U.S. renunciation of claims to a leading role in this region. The same applies to the Indo-Pacific region. There are analysts who say, now the United States will leave Europe to its own devices. In the Middle East, they will freeze things. Another war will be stopped. And then they need to reach an agreement with Russia. Remove the Ukrainian problem from the negotiating table. Not my war, I didn't start it, says President Trump. It only gets in the way. We set it aside and then start doing a huge number of mutually beneficial projects with Russia. They name all sorts of things. This is not said out loud, but it is implied. This would allow them to concentrate by removing the problems in Europe around Ukraine that have arisen, and thereby establish cooperation with Russia. This would allow them to focus all main efforts on countering China. That is the essence of the analytical conclusions of our and some Western political scientists who have analyzed the U.S. national security strategy and defense strategy. And the Americans themselves do not particularly hide this. To get to the heart of your question, of course, it could be answered briefly, but I wanted to go into a bit more detail. For us, of course, it is important to ensure our national interests. We agree with the Trump administration that the foreign policy of normal major powers, especially such as the United States and Russia, should be based on national interests. I already quoted Marco Rubio when we had our first meeting with him in February in Saudi Arabia, when he said, "When the national interests of the United States and Russia coincide, we should take advantage of that. We should take advantage of it and implement mutually beneficial projects, but more often they will not coincide. And in those cases, it would be a crime to allow this mismatch to grow into hot confrontation or any confrontation at all." We agree with that. But now we hear from President Trump, from his team, Witkoff, Kushner, who are now working not only on Ukraine, but also on the Middle East, Palestine, Iran, in all directions, and also on the prospects for trade and economic cooperation between Russia and the United States. We hear from them. If only we could remove Ukraine. We see the root causes. We are ready to settle, to facilitate settlement by eliminating these root causes. Ukraine should not be taken into NATO, and the territorial issue should be resolved based on the realities that have developed, taking into account the will of the people living on the relevant lands. But even in Alaska, we came very close to an agreement, and we hoped that since the Russian leader ultimately accepted the proposal of the American leader, this could simply be announced, and many issues would be resolved much faster. But unfortunately, time is passing. During this time, Europe is trying, and Zelensky, of course, to throw the American negotiators off track, so to speak. They are also using the opposition inside the United States itself. There are plenty of Russophobes there who believe that Ukraine cannot be abandoned. On the contrary, it must be egged on against our country in every way, armed, and so on. Nevertheless, such assessments are heard regularly. We have such prospects with Russia. The Arctic, hydrocarbons, space, artificial intelligence, high technologies. We are all for it. We are interested in developing mutually beneficial cooperation with the American side. And there is interest from business and from figures who play a leading role, including with President Trump, as we understand. But if we analyze what practical steps have been taken on the Russian track during the year of the Trump team's second term in the White House, then, frankly speaking, we are not moving in that direction. Sanctions remain. Moreover, a couple of weeks after Alaska, all overseas projects of Lukoil and Rosneft were banned by an illegal American decision. And now we know, and they do not particularly hide it, sanctions and tariffs against all countries that buy Russian oil and gas. There was contact between Trump and India, after which he announced that India would not buy Russian oil. Well, India did not confirm this, but this is the goal, to seize the global energy market and displace Russia. Of course, once you seize it, they are directly trying, in contacts with partners from third countries, saying, you shouldn't buy from Russia. Yes, America is a bit more expensive, but it's good oil, the right molecules, as they said back under Biden. Here the Republicans probably also have something. Russia can counter something in this direction of fighting for the market. That's what I'm talking about. And by the way, let's not forget that our leading positions in the world in the nuclear energy market are also being challenged by the Americans. And in countries where we already have projects, where there is work experience, including among our neighbors and a number of European countries, the Americans are working to reorient their energy to their standards. They do not hide this either, not to mention the sanctions and tariffs that are being raised to the skies for those countries that do not obey the Americans in how to deal with the Russian Federation. Our approach, as determined by the President, is determined by our national interests. We do not accept methods of trade, economic, or currency wars, because the abuse of the dollar continues on an unprecedented scale. Literally, the top Americans are not shy about it. The Secretary of the Treasury, who is very active when it comes to condemning someone or imposing some sanctions, Mr. Bessent, I think literally yesterday or the day before, stated that it was precisely the actions of the United States to completely cut off dollar flows to Iran that provoked the unrest that led to mass protests and the deaths of people. They are proud of it. Our actions, I just want to say once again, we have spoken about this many times. We must not fall into some kind of enthusiastic perception of what is happening. That President Trump has put the Europeans in their place, put Zelensky in his place, demands that they comply. Everything is fine if we want to achieve peace in Ukraine, But we are not there yet. And the negotiations that continue. The second round took place in Abu Dhabi. There is still a long way to go.
By the way, can we already say anything about the conclusions or results of this second round, and the fact that they were originally planned as bilateral but ended up becoming trilateral? The Americans still joined. Is this positive or negative overall?
I don't think there were any serious reasons for changing the format. Simply, when they initially agreed on the second round in Abu Dhabi, as I understand it, Witkoff and Kushner planned to be busy with other matters during those specific dates. Then, somehow they shifted them. This is completely secondary. But as for the Ukrainian settlement itself, they know our position very well. The root causes will not disappear anywhere if we do not take into account the task of eliminating them in any peace agreement. We are ready for this. We have already said this many times. President Trump has publicly recognized our interests in non-expansion of NATO. And this is a huge step. No other Western figure has said anything like that, and he has confirmed it repeatedly. And as I already said, the issues of the people who live on those lands and who did not agree with the fact that in 2014 neo-Nazis came to power in Ukraine through an illegal coup d'etat, when all of Europe spat on its promises once again and lied. These people, just for refusing to accept the illegal power, were declared terrorists, and so on, called to go to Russia. Without these two questions, nothing can be resolved. Just as nothing can be resolved on the basis of the cunning line that Europe is now pushing, and which Zelensky is actively playing along with. The most important thing is to stop people suffering, to stop the bloodshed, an immediate ceasefire and security guarantees for Ukraine. And then we'll see. And what does that mean? It means stopping. As Zelensky said, we will stop at the current line of contact, but we will not recognize anything, and we are not going to make any legal concessions. It's all ours. We will just temporarily save lives, and in parallel receive sharply increased military aid on the remaining territory under the slogan of security guarantees for Ukraine. Britain, France, their leaders Macron and Starmer, together with NATO Secretary General Rutte, openly boast that expeditionary intervention forces will be deployed there, and there will be an automatic guarantee that the United States will support them militarily. I'm not going to touch on the topic now of how we are discussing this with the Americans. Not that we are discussing it, we simply ask them, is this true? And I have no doubt that the answer will not be positive for the Europeans and Zelensky. But the very logic is that whatever remains of Ukraine must enjoy maximally concrete and practically implementable security guarantees. So what about the essence of the regime? A regime that has banned Russian in all spheres, education, media, culture, everyday life, that has banned the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that legislatively encourages the ideology and practice of Nazism, including ritual torchlight marches and other satanic procedures. If this regime remains, then they want to provide security guarantees precisely to this regime. What do they answer to this question? No one answers anything. We simply raise these questions. And I am convinced that the Americans hear these arguments of ours. I already said in one of my recent interviews that in the initial plan discussed in Alaska, there was a demand to restore the rights of Russians, Russian speakers, national minorities, and religious rights. This is not some whim of ours. They say, we'll stop the war now, and then we'll bargain. Who with whom what? How can you bargain over what does not belong to you? The demand to respect human rights regardless of race, sex, language, and religion is the first article of the UN Charter. But if you retrospectively scroll through the picture, in all discussions on Ukraine after the coup, not a single European, and at that time not a single American politician or leader even used the phrase human rights. Simply not. On the contrary, Ursula von der Leyen says every day on every corner that we must stand with Ukraine because Ukraine defends European values. So your values are Nazism, Russophobia, and an absolutely unprecedented attack on the Russian language. Nowhere in the world, in no country between conflicting countries, be it the Israeli-Arab conflict or any other, is anyone's language banned. But here you see the adversary's language, all these insane Meirat sites. Is all this going to remain under Western security guarantees? The lists that ban mentioning Lermontov, Pushkin, Bulgakov, Nicholas II as symbols of Russian imperialism. Is this a civilized country? Therefore, we will demand very concrete answers to these questions. Security guarantees, for whom and for what purpose? But even from these problems and claims you have listed, it seems that the negotiating track is now hopeless. The negotiating track consists of a whole range of components, and the root causes are the basis of our position. Russia's security and the rights of Russians and Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, in full accordance with international law and the UN Charter. Recognition of territories is a topic that directly stems from the root causes, because the territories came under Russian control due to the fact that an attempt was made to create a threat to us there, and simply to exterminate people who had lived there for centuries. And these issues are being discussed. The details that are being considered between the militaries are, of course, multifaceted and significant. And everything needs to be worked out down to the smallest detail, because when a settlement is reached, when the United States finally forces its clientele in Ukraine and in Europe to behave decently, then mechanisms for monitoring how this will be implemented will require very careful elaboration, including primarily through military channels, because we already have the sad experience when agreements were first destroyed between Yanukovych and the opposition in February 2014. Then the Minsk agreements were destroyed, a document of higher status, approved by the UN Security Council. And they spat on all these security councils and on these statuses. Merkel and the then president of France Hollande, many years later, when our special military operation had already begun, said, yes, no one is going to implement these agreements. And there, I will remind you, special status for Donbass was envisaged in the Constitution of Ukraine. Moreover, this requirement was confirmed at the meeting in December 2019, which Macron hastily convened. Zelensky was already there, the one who is sometimes shown on TV channels, sitting at a press conference, clowning around like a jester. But there they adopted a document saying that changes would be made to the Constitution, fixing the permanent special status of Donbass. None of this was done, just as nothing was done when we agreed with the Ukrainian proposal a couple of weeks after the start of the SMO in Istanbul in April 2022. And there too, security guarantees occupied a central place. And I draw your attention to how they were formulated there. The document was initialed by the delegation, and then the Ukrainians were forced primarily by the British. But I think the Europeans also lent a hand. Their security guarantees for Ukraine were also discussed, but the guarantors were proposed to be the permanent members of the Security Council, including Russia and China, with the possible addition of Germany and Turkey. Roughly, that was how it was described. And the essence of the guarantee was that when something happened that did not fit into the agreements, all guarantors gather and by unanimity, by consensus, make some decision. This suited us because it really had to do with a collective format in the sphere of security guarantees. Now all this has been crossed out, and security guarantees now are not for Ukraine in the context of pan-European security, but security guarantees for Ukraine so that it can continue hostile actions against the Russian Federation. So I have no doubt that the American mediators perfectly understand the story. The president has personally spoken with them repeatedly. There are other channels for conveying our current positions to them. But how much readiness and desire the United States will have to force acceptance of these absolutely ineradicable, I would say, positions, we will see.
Do you see Europe at all in any capacity in this issue of settling the situation around Ukraine? Again, supposedly French presidential diplomatic advisor Emmanuel Bon came to Moscow. Are there any shifts from that side?
There are contacts that some of our European neighbors are trying to establish through various channels. Honestly, nothing new compared to what the respective countries say publicly reaches us. It's the same as some time ago, after the start of the SMO, some leaders came, Macron came, there was communication with Scholz, if I remember correctly, with the former German Chancellor. And everything they said in confidential contact with our president fit into their public loud demands that Russia attacked. Russia must stop this war. We must defend Ukraine to the last, to inflicting defeat. and conveying such messages during contacts, they tried to take on the function of one of the mediators. And now, of course, they have calmed down a bit with their demands for inflicting defeat, but they still cannot calm down. They have officially announced, various Mirzas Pistorius, that by 2029 to 2030 we need to be ready for war against Russia. At the same time, I have already drawn attention to the fact that they gloat, presenting the situation on the front as if things are getting harder and harder for us, that we are weakening, our economy is sagging. They juggle this daily. And in parallel, without any logical connection, they say, and therefore we need to prepare for war with Russia, because it will attack us in 3 years. Sort out your arguments somehow. But people will tell you in response, well, if Russia now stops the conflict in Ukraine and prepares precisely for 2029 to 2030. This does not bother us much, because the president has already said, we are conducting a special military operation in Ukraine. We are not going to attack any Europe. We have absolutely no need for that. And if Europe suddenly implements these threats of preparing for war against us and starts attacking the Russian Federation, the president said, this will not be a special military operation on our part. It will be a full-fledged military response with all the means available to us in accordance with the doctrinal documents on this matter. Therefore, I hope that more and more sober voices are sounding there now, but Europe is certainly in a torn state. Greenland showed how shaky that image of solidarity, mutual assistance, mutual understanding that was created around both NATO and the European Union is. So, I don't know how Europe will be now. There are signals that they are sending through various not entirely public channels. We also consider part of the problem, part of the process. We must have a place at the table. But they say this publicly too. So nothing new is happening here either. And when Macron announced again 3 weeks ago, I will call Putin, I will prepare now. Then they say, we need to prepare the technical side of the conversation with Putin. But this is not serious. If you want to call, just call. Usually mature leaders announce their contacts after the conversation has taken place. Making these announcements as if you are preparing some kind of show and need to excite as many viewers as possible. What Europe is, that is what it is.
Возвращаясь к вопросу отношений с Соединенными Штатами.
Returning to the question of relations with the United States, the New START treaty has expired, and in fact we have found ourselves in a situation where mutual verification mechanisms and inspections have not worked for several years. Now quantitative restrictions have also disappeared. The situation is actually frightening, including from the point of view of some false signals about an alleged launch somewhere. This can all lead to simply sliding into mutual destruction. How does Russia see a way out of this situation now, since I understand that the United States is not particularly saying anything about moving in this direction to resolve this issue? How does Moscow see this problem, or is the solution to this question postponed to the distant future when the situation between Russia and the United States, Russia, the United States, Europe, and so on, is normalized?
Россия, США будет нормализована, Россия, США, Европа и так далее.
Ну, мы видим ситуацию такой, какой она есть.
We see the situation as it is. And it once again confirms that no matter what international treaties in the field of strategic stability, arms limitations, security are signed with whomever, our main allies still remain the Army, Navy, and now aerospace forces. And we will rely precisely on that. We are calm about the condition of our corresponding systems. We are confident that this absolutely reliably guarantees our security. And our adversaries know that if they attempt any aggressive actions to undermine our sovereignty, they may receive an absolutely unacceptable response for them. This is essentially the basics of nuclear deterrence that have always existed. And I would not dramatize it so much yet. There are voices saying the treaty has collapsed. The treaty has not been in effect for the last 3 years already. It was extended. Yes, it was not extended. It was fully suspended. The only thing is that when this suspension took place, we said that under conditions when the United States, the Biden administration, took an openly hostile position toward us, they devalued the treaty because the treaty was based on principles of mutual respect, taking into account mutual interests in the field of security, and so on. All this was trampled by the Biden administration. You remember what actions it took, what words it used to describe the Russian Federation. And we said, "Dear friends, we did not agree with President Obama under such conditions. And since you have radically abandoned these conditions, we are suspending the treaty. Do you want to shout that we are the main threat and we must suffer strategic defeat, and at the same time stand at our nuclear facilities checking us? No, that will not happen." And we suspended the treaty completely. But as a gesture of goodwill, President Putin announced that we are ready, during the remaining term until the expiration of the treaty, to adhere to its central quantitative indicators. And there was such an understanding, and the Americans followed it. And now, since the already suspended treaty has finally lost its force on February 5th, as yet another gesture of goodwill, the President in September proposed to think about extending these voluntary moratoriums on increasing the central ceilings provided for by the treaty on a mutual basis. This did not happen. We said publicly, "So far there is nothing. That is, there will be no more response." Yesterday, the MFA issued a detailed statement reflecting the position of all relevant agencies and approved by the President of the Russian Federation. Everything is said there. We will very closely monitor how the American side will act now after the formal absence of any restrictions. At the same time, we will treat this situation with full responsibility, and we are not going to take the first steps toward escalation. What the Americans are going to do, President Trump again, I think yesterday, said that this treaty is bad, that China is needed, and besides it was violated. What violations he saw on the Russian side, I do not know. We had serious questions to which the Americans did not respond regarding strict compliance with the treaty requirements, but from our side, we did not allow such things, at least while it was fully in force for us. And Trump said again that now a treaty needs to be made with the Chinese. The Chinese have repeatedly stated their position, and we respect it. But if the emphasis is shifted to a trilateral process, this may be a desire simply to divert the essence. The more participants, the more difficult it is internally. At the same time, the Americans say nothing about Britain or France. Although, unlike with the Chinese, they have legal allied obligations with the United States to fight together. And of course, without taking their potentials into account, it is difficult to imagine a long-term multilateral agreement.
Сергей Викторович, тут вот...
Sergey Viktorovich, the other day Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated that Jeffrey Epstein was most likely an agent of Russian special services. Allegedly, what was happening on his island became compromat that was transferred or ended up in the hands of Russian special services and can be used to influence Western elites, including Donald Trump. Was Epstein a Russian spy, or did he cooperate with Russia?
Российский шпион или сотрудничал с
Ну,
российскими
вас уже в желтизну заносит.
You're already slipping into yellow journalism. This is what is being discussed now. And this question refers back to the first question, the task of Russian diplomacy. What to answer? This is not discussed. They are trying to cause irritation in those countries that someone in the political circles of other countries does not like very much. They are trying to use it against the Republican Party in the United States and against the Democratic one. In Europe, there have already been resignations of some figures in the diplomatic field in England. Some lord was shown in his underwear somewhere, and he proudly resigned. You understand, if we speak in principle about what influence this group on Epstein's island had, then probably any intelligence service would consider it an honor to recruit Epstein and obtain some materials. But this never interested us at all, and now they are trying to find some Russian traces in this heap of millions of pages, Russian mentions, surnames. As Vysotsky sang, our penetration across the planet is especially noticeable from afar. So no, you don't know anything about any connection. I don't even want to discuss it, because this topic has no relation to our diplomatic work. And this topic has to do with exposing that face called the collective West, which is now called the deep state, or rather not even state, but deep union, which rules the entire West and tries to rule the whole world. That this is generally below human understanding. That this is pure Satanism. Probably no need to explain to a normal person.